There you are. Bradley is now enormous and looking fantastic. It looks like you're at the office, literally at the office.
It's the first time in a month. I mean, that I'm at the office. So,
okay. So, are you watching the Some Good News Network too? Just in the spirit of the office?
Oh, I have been, and I'm actually I love it, and I'm trying to actually figure out how to do this a little bit for nonprofits. Is to find good news that is
right.
Happening in the sector that we can share with other individuals as inspiration. And so I'm putting some work into that. Not fully committed to it yet, but I'm working through it. So
also in the spirit of that, if you had a favorite character in The Office, who would it be?
Oh man, I don't know. Like probably, and I'm blanking on his name, but John Krasinski. I mean, probably honestly is my favorite. I feel like how could he not? But they Dwight had some very entertaining moments as well. So
yes, I'm seeing the Dwight reference here. Although now the chat is obscuring your face. There we go. Zoom is an ever moving object here.
And I stopped sharing the slides just so that people can just see you guys having the conversation. So I'll be manning the chat now, and I'm also a Dwight fan. So we're just going to put that out there.
So Bradley, thank you for doing this and having a conversation, letting me ask you a few questions.
Absolutely.
I did just want to, first of all, give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're working and what you do.
Yeah, thank you. So I lead the marketing efforts at Kindful. If you're not familiar with Kindful, we are a donor management fundraising platform. And I'm really excited about, talking about this topic particularly because prior to working or before I worked at Kindful, I spent almost 5 years working at an email marketing provider, Emma Email Marketing. Mm-hmm. And so email is something that is near and dear to my heart. And I've spent many years in and around studying it and understanding it. And I think it's a really fascinating thing. And it's still not dead. Like every year there's a thing that comes out and says email's dead. And it's not even close. It's greatly evolved, but it's not dead. And so I think I'm just super excited because we've had so many questions as well about email and how to use it during this time and all those things. So I'm really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, it's a huge topic, and we could definitely take more than 20 minutes talking about email or going through our email every morning for that matter.
Sure.
But talking to somebody who actually knows how to make the best use of it is exactly the point of all this. And there are a few questions we talked about covering, so I'll just jump into that, but maybe when we can make it a bit freeform, and we'll also try to keep one eye on the chat so we don't leave anybody out. It's pretty important stuff. And so we'll start with this concept that Taylor was just introducing as she introduced our little segment here about being frozen. And this is a big problem in communications, right? I think right now for nonprofits, we're hearing a lot about it clearly. And it's the issue is how can we get organizations to kind of feel the thaw and make appropriate asks using digital? So do you have thoughts about that, especially with respect to email?
I do. It's something I've heard a lot as well. And I think one of the things that stands out to me is, and I think we might cover this a little bit in the next couple of questions as well, but is the idea that I think what really freezes people is not understanding a strong purpose in your communication or a strong, I like to call it the why, right? Like the why behind your message. I think so often we kind of get in this thing where we say, I need to or I should communicate right now, but we don't know. And I think what freezes us up is we don't know what to say, right? And so I think sometimes we have to back up a little bit and talk about and really think about why are we communicating? It's not the communicating obviously is important, but if you don't have a strong purpose in your message and a strong why, and it doesn't always have to be an ask, it can be just sharing information, sharing good news, sharing things. But I think you have to just start with the why. And if you can formulate a strong, why am I sending this communication? It becomes much easier to actually write the content around that why. And so, and not even like, why is your organization sending it? But more importantly, why is your end user or your constituent going to find it interesting? Why is it important to them? And I think if you can get to the why, everything else becomes a lot easier.
Wow, there's so much we could dig into right there. But just looking at this architecturally for a second, a lot of organizations, maybe people who are joining us today, are still deeply invested in direct mail. And sort of like you started by joking about the death of email. People have been joking about the death of direct mail since, I don't know, since the birth of printing. So I guess one question is, if your organization is traditionally direct mail heavy, and now you need to use email as a primary communications tool, how do you get started and do that effectively? How do you use the best practices that you have been employing to make sure that that works for the donor as well as for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the topic we could go really deep into, because there's so much about data and what information do you have and how can you segment and all those things. But I think initially starting out, just understanding who do you have email addresses for, right? I mean, and I know that sounds super simple. And even if you don't have them, how could you get them, right? And I know I might say some things here that just seem overly simplistic, but I think there's sometimes really simple solutions to complex questions, right? And part of that is maybe, the thing is picking up the phone and just calling people and saying, hey, we want to update our database. Right. And, we'd love to have an updated email address for you. But I think one of the bigger challenges is if you are heavily reliant on some of that more traditional fundraising tactics like direct mail, in-person events, things like that just sitting down for coffee, it just making sure you have the data, and then also ensuring how old is that data. So if there are some things that you probably need to pay attention to. You can do a lot of research, but if you Google can spam, you'll find really quickly who you can and can't actually engage with based on how long it's been since they've done something with your business. So if you've never emailed someone, the quick rules would be, if you've never emailed someone, if they've done business with your organization or they have signed up for an email list, giving you a donation in the last 18 months, you should be great to send them a message. If you're looking back at really old records, you probably just want to be careful who you're sending a message to from the standpoint of canned spam laws. But I think the biggest thing is just, where do you keep that data? Going and figure out who all you have email addresses for, and starting there. I mean, I know that's super simplistic, but it really has to start with, do you have the information?
And that's changing all the time, right? I mean, it's and have you seen that also collapse in terms of time? That it maybe if we were talking 5 years ago, your updates would need to be this far apart, but now you better be checking it this far apart.
Well, I think the bigger thing is I don't know that the laws or the rules have changed as much as the tools, and Google and stuff is really paying attention to how much are people engaging with your emails. And that lets them understand if your email should go into the spam box, into the junk folder, or into someone's inbox. And so I think, it's really, really important that you pay attention to that you have good data, good email addresses. And if people haven't opened an email for, let's say, 3 months, should you be continuing to send them emails? Because, Google and Yahoo and AOL and all the tools and Outlook, they all have kind of algorithms they use on the back end to understand how good is your message and is it something that resonates with your audience?
Right. Now, another thing I know we wanted to talk about, because it's so critical, it's another thing we could talk about forever, is cultivation, which we talked a lot about during this Pivot conference, and we talk about a lot in fundraising, as we should, versus acquisition. And there's always this debate about, the one versus the other, but in fact, they're all of a piece, right? I mean, we're always trying to welcome new people in, but we better do a good job with the people who love us. So what are your recommendations for how organizations should be thinking about maybe end goals or what the ultimate objectives are with their communications, both solicitations and non-solicitations, when it comes to cultivation versus acquisition?
Yeah, I'm going to try to hit on a couple quick things here and try to do as fast as possible. But one is, one of the things I think is most detrimental that you could be doing is only sending appeals or asks via email. And And I think that's something that we oftentimes can get ourselves into a little bit. Is the why is we get focused so much on we need to raise money, and of course you do, right? But I think there's a really important thing to think about, and that is that someone has given to your organization likely because they really, really care deeply about the work you do. And so there's a great opportunity to just share how that work is progressing, share adjacent topics, news articles. If you blog, share your blog posts. But that's what we would consider cultivation, and doing that without a financial ask tied to it. And we actually did a study with Next After recently. And as part of that study, we found that if one organization saw a really large organization, but they saw like a 40% increase in donations when they just added in one cultivation email per month, right? Where they were just emailing out of their email database. So when they went back to do their appeals, they actually saw a 40% increase. And so it's just huge when you can actually provide value to, and so I don't think we do it enough. And I mean, I think like even as a for-profit business that serves nonprofits, we don't do it enough. You know, we're trying to do better at sharing information that we know is valuable to the nonprofit sector. Mm-hmm. And so I want to add to this that our attention span has got way shorter than it used to be.
Sure.
And so I would encourage you to be very clear with your call to action or your purpose of your email when you're sending cultivation versus like an ask or acquisition. And I think what we tend to do is we say, well, we don't want to bombard people's inboxes. So we're going to send a newsletter that's 3 scrolls long that has all this information in it. And it has an ask, and it has a volunteer opportunity, and it has 3 blog posts, and it has a video. I would strongly encourage you to consider breaking those things into individual emails and sending them with a very clear subject line and a very clear one call to action. It is watch the video, read the blog post, volunteer, give, right?
So,
and those
does that mean that you can have a little more frequency as long as it's in digestible portions that call attention to the things that the recipient would be interested in? I just want to make sure I understand frequency versus that problem with volume.
I absolutely think that's the case. And I think that you have to be careful, and you want to pay attention to your audience. You may even want to get some feedback every now and then. But I absolutely think sending more digestible content that and we always use the phrase burning calories. How many calories does it take to burn to be able to understand the content in this email? So like if I'm getting multiple call to actions, multiple pieces of content, it may take me a lot of calories in my brain to figure out how much, what do you want me to do here? Do you want me to do all these things, or you want me just to do one? And I think there's a lot of value in just providing one call to action so that when I open the email, I'm able to see very clearly from the subject line to the content, to the imagery, to the button, you know, this is what you wanted me to do.
More snacks, less steaks.
Yes. Yeah. Isn't that supposed to be a healthy way to eat? You know,
calories. That makes perfect sense because attention is pretty important. It's hard to retain it. So now let's dive into one other piece of what you talked about a second ago. I think it does. This all comes into a narrative that you're kind of telling us, and that's about first the data side. You said you have to make sure your email addresses are up to date, for example. Then you have to think about how you're going to message people, make sure the messages work for the people who are receiving them, and make sure they're in digestible portions. But that all it comes within the architecture of how we do our work, CRMs and data. So can you talk a bit about that and how people should be thinking about that, especially if they haven't visited that in a while?
Yeah, and I think I'm going to stay really closely aligned just to email here because, again, CRM's a whole big thing, and we can get into all kinds of stuff around how you should collect your data and all that stuff. But I would say, as it pertains to emails, right, I would say the importance of your CRM is to understand when did someone most recently engage with you and how, and also clear segmentation about what they care about. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to give you one just example there just for a period of time. If your organization has multiple campaigns or multiple different types of work they do, where you ask people to give, like, I know we have an organization who does education in Africa, and then they also do water in Africa, right?
Right. Sure.
And those are two different things. It's a mission organization, but they raise funds separately for those things. And then they communicate, and when they do their cultivation, they communicate about the program someone gave to, not just all programs together, right? Because they're making an assumption, it's probably a good one, that the people who gave to water are very passionate about that, and the people who gave to education are very passionate about that. And so they're very careful to make sure, hey, when we're communicating, when we're cultivating, we're going to share with you what your dollars and what your stuff has done for what you gave to, and so I think, like, the other caution I will give is that in CRMs, you can slice and dice and analyze, and you can get down to, segments that are 3 people. Think about your big segments. Like, start with your big segments: donors versus non-donors, donors versus volunteers. And then in addition, just maybe programs or time since last gift, but don't try to overdo it. 3 to 5 segments at most, unless you're a really large organization with a really large communication staff, and you can do a lot more.
Yeah, and just to make sure I'm hearing you right, you're not saying don't segment, because a lot of organizations don't. You're just saying be really thoughtful about it, right? So yeah. And
don't try. I would just say, like, be thoughtful. Pick 1 or 2 major segments where you can be really thoughtful and clear, but about your message. But right. don't try to over segment. I think that's one thing I see people do.
And that probably lets you do a little bit of testing too, right? I mean, so you can see what's most successful, again, for them. I mean, for the recipients as much as us. So if you were rolling all that together as we kind of wrap up, do you have a kind of a 1-2 punch, if you will, for what you might recommend organizations as we look forward? I mean, the whole idea here is pivoting, and we've both been experiencing these weird things in our offices, in our life. How does that influence what we do tomorrow?
Yeah, I think I'm blanking on the word, but I think, like, transparency and clarity are the 2 most important things right now, and authenticity, right? And so I think those 3 things combined, and I'm going to leave you with this one thing, right? I would really encourage you, if you haven't, like, we spend all this time in these tools like MailChimp, HubSpot, Constant Contact, Emma, all these tools creating these really pretty emails, right? I bet you, if you send an email from your executive director that looks like it was an email that was just written by them with no imagery, that is a letter from the heart, that is authentic about what's going on in your organization, and has a call to action that is not a button, but is a link in the text, right? And you say, I would really love for you to give to this thing, this cause, this movement, whatever it is, this population, you will see a drastic increase in your performance of your emails. We view emails that have all the imagery and everything now as ads. Our brain psychologically views that as an ad, and if you use it like a target ad, if you use it like all the other emails you get, or anything like me, you've got 30,000 unread emails in your personal email inbox. I keep my business one manageable, but I literally have 30,000 unread emails in my personal one. And so I think, I would just really encourage you to think about, like, how do I come across as authentic, clear, concise, and you might be surprised the improvements you can make via email.
And just kind of as a personal question, you get a ton of email. Obviously, you have 30,000 unread. I have tens of thousands because I don't delete, because of lots of business reasons. I keep my email. Yep. I know it's crazy. Yep. So how do you manage all that stuff? You just talked about how to rise to the surface. An organization's message can rise to the surface. I certainly hope everybody's going to do that. Try a message from the heart, from a name to a name. Yes. But how do you manage the flow yourself? I mean, because I deleted like a 90% of my email every day without reading it.
I think that's the thing. But what stops me in my tracks is an email from an individual, right? Like, I stop them and I read them. And so, because I think that they're probably important, right? And a lot of times they are maybe a solicitation or something else, but it's but I do think like an email from an individual to an individual will stop you, and you'll take a few seconds to read it. And so I also have a couple of emails that I think are highly valuable that I read every day that are newsletter style emails, but they've earned that trust from me by sending me really, really relevant content.
We had somebody who wrote in during our conversation too, said, it sounds like you're describing our newsletter. And by the way, we're not describing your newsletter. I'm sure your newsletter is great, but these are great suggestions overall for all of us. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. And I'm just saying, just try some new things and see what happens, right?
Yeah.
Like and there's no template for this. Everybody always wants the recipe and the template. Just be thoughtful, try some new things, see what happens, measure, come back and try something new.
That's what you meant about being authentic, right? I mean, we're going to be ourselves, and that's what Taylor started us off with today. It's, just don't be afraid to fail. Just be yourself and hope, and people respond. I mean, there's a sympathetic vibration we all have.